Hello everyone, this is Dr. Leili Hatami. Welcome to the Human Anatomy course, Chapter 2, Cells, the Living Units. In Chapter 1, we learned about the level of organization from smallest to largest. There are chemical level. In chemical level, we have atoms, molecules, and organelles. And then the organelle is going to make the cell. So the next level is the cellular level, like white blood cells, bone cells, skin cells, and then cells join together and work together, make tissues. So the next level is tissue level, like epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, nervous tissue. When more than two type of tissues join together and work together, they're going to make the organ, like your brain, your heart, your tongue, and then some organs working together make the organ system, which there are 11 organ system in our body. And finally, these 11 organ system make the organism like you and me. In this chapter, we are going to focus on the cell. Cells are the smallest living unit. So the smallest living units in our body are the cells. But when we are talking about the smallest thing can be found in the chemical level. So the smallest thing are like atom, molecules, even organelles. But when we are talking about the living thing or the living units, we are going to talk about the cell. Because cells are alive like you and me. They are able to obtain the nutrients, make the waste products, produce the molecules, divide themselves, so they are alive. And the cells are responsible to perform all the functions necessary to sustain life, such as metabolism, the energy production, movement. They are able to respond to external stimuli, cellular reproduction, and waste elimination, and so on. But why cells can do all of this? Because cells have organelles, the little organs going to be found within the cell. Each of the organelles carry different functions. For example, the mitochondria is responsible for energy production. The lysosome acts for digestion of the substances. The ribosome is responsible to produce the protein. So each organelle acts differently. And also inside of the cell, we have the enzyme, which they are responsible to direct the all chemical reactions happening inside of the cell. And also because the cells are able to like do catabolism and anabolism, in total metabolism, like for breaking down the macromolecules or synthesizing the macromolecules, so they can do all the functions necessary to sustain life. Okay, so it means in this chapter, we're just going to focus on the cell. Let's guess how many cells can be found in our body. 1,000? A million? We have trillions of cells found in our body. Between these trillions of cells, we have more than 200 different types of cells. Their shape are different. They have different functions. They're going to be found in different locations in our body. For example, we have the bone cells like osteocytes. Their shape are different than white blood cells, which they're going to be found in our blood and they are responsible to maintain our immunity. Or even the neuron cells or nerve cells, which they have like a very long cytoplasmic processes and they are responsible to control our body. And so we have like different type of cells with different names, and again different shape, different function, different location. we can say all of the cells, they have three main components. No matter if you are talking about the bone cell or the skin cell or the white blood cell, they all have these three main components. They have plasma membrane, cytoplasm, and the nucleus. Let's draw a cell. So the plasma membrane, it makes a boundary around the cell, which it's gonna separate the intracellular environment from the extracellular environment. And then we have the nucleus, which houses the genetic material for the cell. So we have the nucleus inside of the cell, and then the plasma membrane, like a boundary around the cell. And between the nucleus and plasma membrane, we have the cytoplasm. Okay, so in this picture, you can see a structure of a generalized cell. So as you can see here, we can have the plasma membrane around the cell, the nucleus, which it houses the genetic material, and between the nucleus and the plasma membrane, we have the cytoplasm, and all the things gonna be found inside of this cytoplasm. Okay. And now we are going to study the plasma membrane structure as our course is anatomy, and we are going to study the structure of the organs or the cells or the body. Okay, so the plasma membrane, also known as plasmalemma, which, as I mentioned before, it's going to separate a cell from its environment. Let's draw another cell so we can have the extra cellular environment, which means everything which gonna be found around the cell, and also inside of the cell we have the intercellular environment. So the plasma membrane simply is going to separate the inside of the cell from the outside of the cell, and also is selectively permeable. So when we are going to talk about the permeability, it means that the substances can move in and out of the cell, but this movement, it's selective. It means that some substances like the oxygen, carbon dioxide, they easily can pass through the plasma membrane, but some, based on their size and charge, they cannot easily pass through the plasma membrane. So the plasma membrane is controlling whatever going to inside and out of the cell. Okay, and now let's focus on the plasma membrane structure. We say the plasma membrane is like a fluid mosaic model. What does it mean that the plasma membrane is a fluid model? It means that the plasma membrane is not rigid, but rather fluid. And the fluidity is crucial for various cellular processes, including the movement of molecules and the flexibility of the membrane itself. But what about the mosaic model? The term mosaic indicates that the membrane is composed of diverse molecules, including lipids, protein, and carbohydrates. These molecules are not randomly arranged, but rather form a mosaic-like pattern. Okay, speaking about the molecules going to be found in the structure of the plasma membrane, let me remind you about the macromolecules. The macromolecules or biomolecules are the large and complex molecules which only going to be found in animal or plant cells. We also can call them as biomolecules. So the example of macromolecules or biomolecules are proteins, carbohydrate, lipid and nucleic acid. Between these macromolecules, we can find lipid, protein, and carbohydrate in the structure of the plasma membrane. Lipid is going to make the basic structure and background of the plasma membrane. What kind of lipid gonna be found in the structure of the plasma membrane? We have phospholipids and also cholesterol. The phospholipids, these molecules which make the most abundant type of lipid in the plasma membrane, they have a head, which the head part is the phosphate group, and they have a tail, which their tail is the fatty acid. Phospholipid, their head is polar. It means that it's hydrophilic. The term hydro means water, and philic means that they love water, and their tail is hydrophobic. The phobic, like phobia, they hate of water, or they're scared of water. So their tail is hydrophobic. Okay, now we have a molecule which gonna make the basic structure of the membrane, with one side which loves water and the other side which hate water. Okay, and let's one more time draw a cell. Inside of the cell, which we have the intracellular fluid, and then the outside of the cell we have the extracellular fluid. And we already know that 60 to 70% of our body is water, right? But where is this water going to be found? Inside of the cell or out of the cell? Your answer is correct. The water is going to be found in both. In and out of the cell, we have water. And guess what? Now we have a molecule going to be found in the plasma membrane. However, one side of this molecule love water, is wants to be toward the water, in or out, and one side of this molecule is hate water. Okay, how we can put this type of molecules here between two watery environments? The best option is to have two layer of lipid or phospholipid. In this way, the head of one layer gonna be toward the water outside, and the other layer, the head of this molecule, is gonna be toward the water inside. So that's the reason the phospholipid is gonna be two layer, or the plasma membrane is the lipid bilayer, as bi means two. Okay, so it means simply we have two layer of phospholipid in the structure of the plasma membrane, which all their head, their polar head, their hydrophilic head gonna be toward the water outside and also inside, and all the tail, which they are hydrophobic, they are non-polar, gonna be toward each other. Okay, next is cholesterol. Cholesterol is other type of lipid gonna be found between the phospholipid of the plasma membrane, which make the membrane a little bit rigid, or we can say the cholesterol is regulate the fluidity of the plasma membrane. In the area of which there are high cholesterol, it's more rigid, and the area of the plasma membrane which is it has less cholesterol, it's less rigid or more fluid. The other type of macromolecules can be found in the plasma membrane are proteins, which are embedded within the lipid, and they provide the means of transport through the membrane, because we know the cell is going to uptake the nutrients from the outside environment, and also they are going to send out their waste products or the secretion. So then there are some kind of transportation across the plasma membrane, which the protein can make the like it can act as a transporter or the equipment which can help for transportation of some of these substances or molecules. And next we have the carbohydrate, which the carbohydrate only going to be found in the outside of the plasma membrane and the recognition patterns for cells and organisms. Okay, so let's review the plasma membrane structure. So as you can see in this picture is a portion of the plasma membrane. You can see the extracellular fluid, which is the watery environment, and obviously we have some like dissolved nutrients and substances here. And inside of the cell we have also the intercellular fluid, or it's a watery environment. And this is the structure of the membrane, which you can see here. We have these molecule phospholipid with a polar head and non-polar tail, or hydrophilic head and hydrophobic tail. Look at this. We have one and then two layer. So as you can see, their head gonna be toward the watery environment in and out, and their tail gonna be toward each other. So then you can see how the phospholipid gonna make the basic structure for the plasma membrane. And look at this cute yellow structure, which is the cholesterol molecule gonna be found between the phospholipid. As I mentioned before, they are going to control the rigidity and fluidity of the plasma membrane. And then the next macromolecule is protein. The protein is embedded inside of the plasma membrane. Some of them are so large, they are passing through the plasma membrane like that. Then we call them as integral protein. They act as transporter. They also can act as a receptor as well. And then some other protein only gonna be found in inside or even outside of the plasma membrane, which we call them as peripheral protein. And look at these green structure, which as you can see only gonna be found outside of the plasma membrane toward the extracellular environment. These are carbohydrate and act as a marker or for the recognition patterns for the cell. So as you can see, these carbohydrates are bound to the protein or even to the lipid. So then they're going to be called as glycolipids and glycoprotein. The term glyco means sugar or carbohydrate. When we have glycoprotein, it means the carbohydrate bound to the protein, or glycolipid means carbohydrate bound to the lipid. I hope you understood the structure of the plasma membrane. So one more time, the macromolecules are protein, lipid, carbohydrate. We have two layers of phospholipid because of their specific feature of the phospholipid. And then we have the cholesterol. Then there are proteins found embedded into the plasma membrane, and some are going to be found inside and outside of the plasma membrane. There are carbohydrates bound to the protein and to the lipid. Okay, then let's just review the function of the plasma membrane. As we mentioned before, plasma membrane is separating the inside of the cell from outside of the cell. So it acts as a physical isolation. And also it acts like a barrier, as a protective barrier, controlling whatever is going in and out of the cell and regulate the exchange of this material with the environment. It is also involved in cellular communication, The membrane receptors, which are proteins embedded in the plasma membrane, serve as receptor for different signaling molecules such as hormones, neurotransmitters, and growth factor. These signaling molecules bind specifically to their corresponding receptor on the cell surface. So in this way, the cell can communicate with the other cells and then the whole body. Speaking about the membrane transportation or regulating the exchange of the material with the environment, we have to go over how the substances can go in and out of the cell, or what is the concept about the membrane transport. You're going to learn this concept in the physiology in detail, but in this chapter, I'm going over some of the membrane transportation, which we're going to use them a lot in anatomy. So as we discussed earlier, the membrane is selectively permeable, which means that it determines which substances can enter or leave the cell, is controlling the exchange of this material with the environment. But let's talk about how the substances can go or in and out of the cell. We can actually divide the membrane transport to the passive transportation and active transportation. The important difference between the passive transport and active transport is that in passive transport, there is no need to use energy or ATP, but in active transportation across the membrane, we need to use energy as the form of ATP. The passive transportation across the membrane, we can cover diffusion and osmosis. So these two type of transportation across the membrane is the passive transportation, which simply means that we do not need to use energy or ATP for movement of the molecule across the membrane. What is the diffusion? Diffusion means that the molecules can move from higher concentration to lower concentration without using energy. The best example is happening in our body is in our lung, which we have the alveolus or the air sac, which we have the exchanges of respiratory gases between the air sacs and blood. So when we have a higher concentration of the oxygen in the air sac, when we breathe in and bring in the fresh air full of oxygen to the air sacs, so we have the high concentration of the oxygen in our alveolus or in our lung or in our air sacs. But here in the blood, which it's bringing the low oxygenated blood to the lung to be refreshed, we have less oxygen. And let's see how the oxygen can move across the membrane from the air sac to the blood through the diffusion from higher concentration of oxygen to lower concentration of oxygen without using energy. And also the carbon dioxide, which we have more in the blood capillary around the alveolus, and then less carbon dioxide inside of the alveolus or the air sac. So in this way, we have diffusion of the carbon dioxide, which they're moving from higher concentration of carbon dioxide to the lower concentration of the carbon dioxide. So we call this as diffusion. And also the fat-soluble molecules, small uncharged molecules, they easily can pass through the plasma membrane from higher concentration to the lower concentration without using energy, which is diffusion. The other form of passive transportation is osmosis. Osmosis is literally means the movement of molecule, which this molecule is water. Water also can move from higher concentration of the water to lower concentration of water without using energy, which is called the osmosis. So from higher concentration of water to lower concentration of water. Next, membrane transport, which is active transportation, means that we need to use ATP or energy, is called endocytosis. The term endo means inside or into, and cyto means cell. Endocytosis just simply means uptaking the molecules or bring in molecules to the cell, so into the cell. This is an active mechanism. So as I mentioned before, we need to use energy. And in this membrane transport, we are going to move the large particles and macromolecules to the cell. There are three different types of endocytosis. We have phagocytosis, pinocytosis, receptor-mediated endocytosis. The term phago means to eat. Phagocytosis is the process by which a cell engulfs large particles such as bacteria, dead cells, or other debris into vesicles called phagosome. So the phagocytosis literally means cell eating. And the cells are able to do phagocytosis is called phagocytic cell. Phagocytic cell. Like most white blood cells, through phagocytosis, they actually can make immunity for our body. And also we have a cool cell, it's called a macrophage, which the term macro means big and phage means like, again, eat. So the macrophage is a big eater. So it is also another immune cell which can be involved in phagocytosis. Next, we have the pinocytosis, also known as cell drinking, involves the non-specific uptake of small droplets of extracellular fluid containing dissolved substances. The cell membrane invaginates, forming tiny vesicles called pinocytic vesicles, which then pinch off and enter the cell. The pinocytosis is a continuous process that allows the cell to sample its environment, which most cells can do the pinocytosis. Next, we have the receptor-mediated endocytosis, which is a highly specific process where cells take up the macromolecules that bind to specific receptors on the cell surface. The molecules such as hormones or nutrients, enzymes, bind to the receptors on the cell membrane, and then they're gonna go inside of the cell. And let's now review the endocytosis in this picture. So as you can see, we have three types of endocytosis. It shows the phagocytosis. This one is the pinocytosis, and this one is the receptor-mediated endocytosis. With these images, you can easily compare these three types of endocytosis. In phagocytosis and pinocytosis, there is no receptor involved. The phagocytosis, the cell is going to engulf the large particle, bring it inside, make a phagosome, and then the lysosome is going to release its it's an enzyme to this particle and then break it down. In pinocytosis, so as you can see, that this process is non-specific, and then the cell is going to bring in the extracellular fluid containing the dissolved substances. And for the receptor mediated endocytosis, so as you can see, there are receptors found in the plasma membrane which the specific molecule like hormone, like insulin hormone, or like even cholesterol can be bind to these a receptor, and then the cell can bring them in and digest them. Next, the active mechanism, which is another form of membrane transport, is called exocytosis. The exocytosis is a cellular process which, by using energy, some large molecules such as proteins, hormones, neurotransmitter, are transported from the inside of the cell to the extracellular space. So as I mentioned, the most secretion processes, they're going to be transported through the exocytosis, like neurotransmitter for the neuron, the hormone for the endocrine cells, and then the substances is enclosed in a vesicle. Exactly the process is like the endocytosis, but vice versa. In this one, as you can see, the vesicle, which is bounded with the membrane, very similar to the plasma membrane, going to be bound or fused with the plasma membrane, and then they easily can send out their product to the outside of the cell. Okay, I'm going to stop right here, then continue the rest of chapter 2 in another video. Thank you for watching.